So for those of you rolling in, hopefully you're in the right place. This is a real conversation about housing, and we'll start in a minute.
Do you want our audio and video on or off for this program?
Good question. We are going to ask people to keep their audio off for sure. We'll do a little intro, and then at the end, when we have time for questions and answers, you're welcome to chime in then.
Perfect. I'm actually going to leave my video off because I'm eating and working, and I don't want to look like a weirdo dripping food. So thank you so much.
Yeah, so thanks everyone who's joining us. I'm going to start admitting people here with my ability to multitask. You are here for the real conversation about housing. We are recording this session. In a minute, I'll give a little intro and then we'll turn it over to our speakers. And Liz and Ryan, I don't know, are you able to see people coming in and admit them if I start talking? Could you help me do that?
Yes, absolutely. Happy to.
Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna get going since it is 2:31, and I just wanna welcome everybody to our first in a maybe 3-part series called A Real Conversation About Housing and How You Can Help. My name is Yarrow Brown, and I am the Executive Director of Housing North. Our mission is to build awareness, influence policy, and expand capacity so communities can create housing solutions that meet their unique needs. Our vision is that Northwest Michigan will be a place where families of all income levels can find homes that are safe and affordable. Since we have so many people in attendance today, we want to ask that you can please keep your microphones off to avoid any excess background noise. It's up to you if you want your camera on, but we are recording this to be able to share this with people who cannot attend. You'll probably have better bandwidth or ability to participate if your camera is off. And I just wanted to welcome you to this workshop again today. We're bringing this to you because it's a huge topic of conversation around the housing arena, but also we need to better understand the existing resources in our region, as well as the barriers to housing across the income spectrum. I want to recognize that April is Fair Housing Month. The National Fair Housing Month is celebrated to be grateful for the Fair Housing Act, which was passed in 1968. In this session, you'll hear from Liz Keegan. She can maybe give a wave on the screen so you know who she is. And Ryan Hannon, who is joining us in lieu of Ashley being able to be here from the Northwest Michigan Coalition to End Homelessness. We're going to dive into some of the gaps and barriers around housing and why we need more property managers and landlords to provide year-round rental housing in our region. Thank you to Ryan and Liz for being here today and for your willingness to share your experience. I just want to remind you of who Housing North is, what we do briefly before we introduce our speakers. We cover the 10 counties in Northwest Michigan, and we are funded by Rotary Charities of Traverse City and the Fry Foundation, and Networks Northwest is one of our founding partners. We focus on awareness, advocacy, capacity, and resources all around housing. And I did just want to mention a few of our programs that we have in case you are not aware. We have a Housing Ready program where we're putting boots on the ground in each of our 10 communities to help with technical resources and advocacy around housing. We also have a deed restriction program that was launched in the city of Charlevoix for year-round housing, and also launched in Charlevoix is an accessory dwelling unit program. We provide advocacy trainings, educational webinars, and coming up in the fall, in October, will be our 8th annual Housing Summit. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. Ask you to please save any questions for the end. If you do have a clarifying question, you can go ahead and ask that, but we will make some space and time for questions at the end. And then I'm going to turn it over to Liz to start us off with our presentation. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you. Hopefully my presentation is up for everyone. So thanks so much for the opportunity and helping us celebrate Fair Housing Month. It's really a real joy to partner and start off this conversation, a really important conversation. looking at opportunity, which of course is very near and dear to the Fair Housing Center's heart. I am the Director of Education and Outreach at the Fair Housing Center. We are located in Grand Rapids, but we do cover Grand Traverse County, and I'll share a map of where our services have grown to extend. I will talk about what fair housing is, who's protected under fair housing laws, the Fair Housing Center's model, our approach to fair housing, but also kind of spend a little bit of time looking at what's happening in terms of allegations and housing discrimination complaints that we've received across our service area, and then looking at Grand Traverse a little more specifically, and share some information about what I see as gaps and limits and some possible opportunities that will hopefully be helpful to moving this conversation forward. So our mission as a nonprofit is to prevent and eliminate illegal housing discrimination, ensure housing opportunity, and promote inclusive communities. We've been around for a long time, more than 40 years. Our primary tasks are to conduct investigations of allegations of housing discrimination, but we also have an arm that is dedicated to providing education to both the housing industry and home seekers. So really, we feel that there isn't anyone who doesn't have a stake, so to speak, in fair housing and understanding fair housing. And of course, each of us as individuals, we all have fair housing rights. So that may also apply based on what your position is or your passions are, what drew you to the conversation today. But I also want to recognize that we as individuals all have these fair housing rights. So I appreciate, again, the opportunity to share what fair housing is. So as we are a private nonprofit organization, we cannot provide any legal advice, but we've been doing this for a very long time, and we are really looking forward to being a part of solutions in Northwest Michigan of the Lower Peninsula, so that we can help ensure opportunity for all. Where you live directly impacts how you live. So being able to choose your housing free from discrimination is very important. And I think coming out of the pandemic, I myself even have a very different understanding of the impact of where I live and the ability to shelter in place and being ordered to stay home and having a place to stay home, I think is really critical. So even though I've worked in fair housing for about 20 years, I feel like I have a very different perspective now in terms of understanding the direct impact of where I live. So as I mentioned, fair housing is the right to choose housing free from experiencing unlawful discrimination based on protected classes that exist under federal, state, and local fair housing laws. As Yarrow mentioned, we are celebrating Fair Housing Month. April 1968, the first Fair Housing Act was passed that brought us race, color, religion, and national origin as protected classes. You may not know that April is Fair Housing Month because of the tragedy of Dr. King's assassination. The folks in Congress passed the Fair Housing Act 7 days after his assassination due to the unrest, due to people demonstrating and showing how difficult their lives have been, and of course, reacting to the loss of a significant leader who worked on what he called open housing. Fair housing laws have since grown and extended. They prohibit discrimination in any housing transaction, including rental, sales, home loans, insuring property, appraisals. We've started to see a big national conversation about discriminatory appraisals. So the laws extend quite far. I also want to highlight, for the purposes of some of the conversation that we'll be having today and in the future of the series, that fair housing laws can cover zoning, land use, and planning, as well as, depending on the type of housing being built, multifamily housing, how it's designed and constructed, which we can see sometimes is not done in compliance, especially for people with disabilities. So there's a close correlation in thinking about how housing is needed, housing that's being developed, housing that's being planned. All of that needs to be done in an equitable manner, and we are here to assist with that. So it's really important to just quickly spend a little bit of time on the protected classes so that you can understand that this is where fair housing laws start. The first question that we ask ourselves is the group or person that's being impacted by this housing practice a member of a protected class? So as I said, the class list has grown, and you can see that it varies. On the left, we have federal protections regarding race, color, meaning skin color, national origin, meaning where someone is from, gender, now including sexual orientation and gender identity across the country for the first time since February of last year, religion, physical or mental disability, and having children under the age of 18 in the home or familial status. HUD managed or funded properties also have an equal access rule that applies to them. They are not allowed to discriminate based on marital status, sexual orientation, or gender identity. Here in Michigan, we have another layer of law that also includes similar protections there, but adds age, with the exception of senior housing. And then local communities across the state have adopted fair housing or human relations ordinances that prohibit discrimination in housing and often then education, employment, and public accommodations. So you can see that there's a variety of different types of protections, a variety of different groups. However, it's not comprehensive, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So our work is accomplished through kind of a two-armed approach. Even though we have education, research, and advocacy here, we really want to work together with any interested parties to prevent housing discrimination from occurring in the first place, wherever possible, remove barriers that allow it to persist, and when we can, restore housing choice when discrimination happens. This can be very difficult, of course, because we often cannot erase the impact of experiencing discrimination, and sometimes we cannot even get the individual into the housing. For example, if a home for sale is denied to a person with a disability because of that disability and it sells to someone else, we cannot undo that harm. But we do the best that we can given the unique circumstances of every case and the unique factors of each situation. My board has been very committed to education, which I appreciate, and it gives us an opportunity to work with anyone who's interested with fair housing. We do provide training to housing professionals, government officials, partners that are looking to develop housing or unique programs in housing. We really are open to having those conversations and thinking about how can we make sure that any policies, programs, developments are put into place in a way that is ensuring equity and doesn't include any discriminatory practices. This one prevents discrimination, but also ensures opportunity for everyone we hope the community can house. You know, the obligation to house people cradle to grave does create more sustainable, stronger communities. We believe that communities that are welcoming to everyone, regardless of any protected class, are being valued more and understood more. That's not to say that our caseload doesn't keep us busy, but we are really looking to do that partnership and help with compliance on the front end as best we can. And then, of course, providing fair housing information to people that might be looking to buy a home, get a home loan, get insurance, get an appraisal, working with frontline agencies that are working with home seekers. We love working with folks to provide them with that education. Not every fair housing center functions that way. So we're happy to be your fair housing center and be a resource really regardless of what role you may play. We also, of course, do take investigations and we conduct our investigations based on allegations of housing discrimination. We try to identify and remove any barriers to housing choice, whether it's one-on-one with an individual experiencing housing discrimination or finding perhaps a discriminatory policy across thousands of units in 3 states. We've seen a little bit of it all. We do conduct something called testing, which people sometimes think of secret shopping. This is where we have trained volunteers going out into the community to ask about apartments for rent, homes for sale, loan products, basically simulating a home seeker. And they essentially record their experiences and bring that information back to the Fair Housing Center. And we can set up the test based on which protected class is either alleged to be discriminated against, or we can set it up as a random survey basis. So we would send out a black tester and a white tester, for example, or a person with a visible disability and a person without a visible disability, a family with no children under the age of 18, a family with young kids. And we compare their 2 stories essentially side by side and look for any differences in treatment. Fair housing laws are really about those differences, which can lead to violations. So we really try to help establish a good understanding of what's happening in the housing market, which then informs the education that we do, in addition to helping our clients one-on-one. If somebody has experienced housing discrimination, we walk with them every step of the way, conducting an investigation if we can, helping them figure out what options they may have if they want to file in court, if they want to file an administrative complaint. We always want to make sure that the housing provider that has violated the law has a good understanding of fair housing going forward. So we really try to provide that training and information, best practice information, while at the same time really meeting the needs of whatever the client would want in terms of what they uniquely experienced. So we do not have attorneys on staff, and therefore we can't give legal advice, and none of what I'm sharing today is legal information, it's educational information. As a nonprofit though, we can offer our services to our clients who are experiencing housing discrimination or looking to find out if they're experiencing housing discrimination for free. And they really lead the course of action that based upon the laws that are in play, the type of housing that's involved in their circumstance, we educate them and give them all the information about what might come next, and they would then make those decisions. And also for the advocates in the room, discrimination can be reported anonymously. That's something you can send directly to me, and I can scrub it of any identifying information and pass that on to our advocacy team. Our takeaway question as we contemplate allegations, how to invest our time and resources, how to tackle this very difficult issue, we were always asking ourselves, what is the best way to further fair housing? That is our guiding question. So I think that that's something to be aware of. It's the only thing that we do. So we are a rare nonprofit where we can say, this is all we do. We don't focus on any other housing issues. We have enough to work on in terms of focusing only on fair housing. And what we want to do is make sure that our communities are free from discrimination at the end of the day. This is a map that MSHDA, the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, made available, kind of breaking down the coverage of the fair housing services and centers available across the state. We are the purple, so you can see we have quite a bit of Michigan. So regardless of where you're calling in from, this might help you identify whether we are your local fair housing center, but I'm always happy to be the first call. And if I have a local resource for you, I'll be sure to connect you. Fair housing laws are very thorough, and the federal fair housing laws covered or layered with the Michigan fair housing laws really leaves very little housing in Michigan uncovered or untouched by a fair housing or civil rights statute. So it can be things that you might expect to see, like an apartment, a condo. Sometimes condos associations are surprised to learn fair housing applies to them, as with senior housing, but that's where the value of education can come in. Even lots that are empty that are intended to become housing can be covered by fair housing laws, rooming houses, cooperatives, housing commission or public housing agencies. They are all covered by fair housing laws. If there's ever any question about coverage, I would encourage you to reach out so we can help establish that information for you. And then briefly, I just want to share, there's a statute of limitations for allegations of housing discrimination to be filed with HUD administratively or the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. Those two are administrative processes. You have up to a year or 6 months, either with the HUD or MDCR, and a 2 to 3 year window in the federal or state courts, depending on which venue you would be using. We have seen a significant jump in the total of our caseload. 2021, we had 200 cases filed with us as a result of 225 allegations. Sometimes cases can involve multiple bases. It can be about having a disability and a darker skin color, your sexual orientation, and the fact that you have children. So this caseload represents a lot of clients, and unfortunately a significant trend of discrimination against people with disabilities, physical or mental disabilities, as you can see, followed by discrimination based on race and or skin color, followed by discrimination against families with children. We saw a significant jump in gender discrimination as well. Unfortunately, these were a lot of sexual harassment in housing cases. And then we've seen an increase in source of income cases where legal and verifiable income is covered under local ordinances in 4 of our communities, Grand Rapids, Kentwood, Wyoming, and Holland, that essentially say housing providers should count all legal and verifiable household income and see if the person qualifies. I'll talk more about this, but only in those 4 cities alone, we had 10 cases. We also unfortunately saw an uptick in national origin discrimination. Some of these cases were harassment or questioning of citizenship that was unnecessary, or people being treated differently because they spoke with an accent. So it's been a slightly different and a higher volume set of cases for us as of 2021. And again, this is all of our service area. Heavily, the violations were related to discrimination in the rental transaction, over 50%, you can see here. We also saw, as you saw, the number one basis of complaint being filed by persons with disabilities. The largest type of case related to that protection is a failure to allow for an accommodation that's reasonable from the housing provider. So these are things like assigning an accessible parking spot to someone with a disability, allowing for an assistance animal in a no pet property based on the presence of a disability, working with somebody on disability income to allow for payment after maybe the rental due date because of the date of the receipt of the disability income. So changes in policies, practices, services of the housing provider. With this intense sales market that has not slowed down throughout the pandemic, we have seen a number of cases brought to our attention as discrimination within that sales process. We've also seen a little bit of mortgage discrimination, but you can also see, just kind of scanning down the list, that there's all types of violations that might occur, including zoning or design and construction situations, or even insurance for a property or a home that was held to a different standard or changed because of who was looking to live there. Watching the clock here a little bit too. I also pulled some data specific to Grand Traverse County. I was very interested to see that the caseload flip-flopped a little bit, where discrimination against families with children came in first, closely related to discrimination against people with physical or mental disabilities, and then followed by discrimination based on race and or skin color, age, and then a very small number of cases related to discrimination under state law about whether or not somebody is married, and then national origin and sexual harassment cases. So these represent about 50 cases, heavily since 2014-15, although a few cases were a little bit older. And then the types of transaction that were impacted by the discriminatory behavior followed kind of a similar pattern, with rental transactions being the highest, followed by discrimination through failure to accommodate or allow for physical modifications like ramps or grab bars for persons with disabilities. Other signs of discrimination is being told the household or family is too large, or there's too many people, or you have too many children. As I mentioned, we've seen an unfortunate trend exacerbated by the pandemic, where residents are being sexually harassed through maintenance, owners or landlords, managers of property. And as I've referenced, we've seen a very consistent 7-year trend now of discrimination against people with disabilities, I think largely due to a lack of awareness of working with persons with disabilities and what the laws say, denying a permission for a ramp to be installed, not allowing a live-in aide who's necessary, or an emotional support or assistance animal. Another topic that has been getting some attention from HUD in the last few years, and just recently, looking at criminal background screening. And there's been some good case law lately that essentially shows that felony bans or no felony policies really can't be defended as non-discriminatory anymore. So I think we'll see a lot more about that. And then really a housing provider like not allowing a family with children on an upper floor or in a unit with a balcony, really essentially removing the choice of housing from the individual or the family, tends to be at risk of being a fair housing violation. So I think for the purposes of this conversation, I want to raise questions about, is everyone welcome, and what can we think about? Oftentimes we've seen discriminatory stereotypes, fears, comments about residents or prospective residents, leading to proposed developments being denied or challenged, or maybe held to different standards, pushed back upon based on who might live in the housing. Some of you may be familiar with the term NIMBYism, short for not in my backyard. And essentially this is something that needs to be evaluated very carefully. If the group that's being discussed of prospective residents or current residents is a protected class, fair housing laws can trigger obligations for the community to handle this in a way that's equitable. So fair housing can be used to increase housing opportunities and allow for maybe some of those developments to move forward based on who is potentially going to live there. That's certainly something we've done some education on. Developers have brought us in to do fair housing education when there's been misunderstanding, resistance, or lack of awareness or education. It's important to think about placement of new or rehabilitated housing for lower income people. There's been a lot of studies and great information about how to avoid reconcentration of high needs populations, and really looking at dispersing these types of housing programs within communities of opportunity, making sure that these individuals and families have opportunities to succeed in education, employment, access to healthcare, transportation, those sorts of things. And as I briefly mentioned earlier, zoning policies can have a lot to do with housing choice. Having large minimum lot requirements or minimum multifamily zoning or other types of restricted zoning may constrain and limit housing, especially for lower income families, families of color, among other protected groups. We've seen real estate professionals and others steering people into or away from certain communities or neighborhoods because of race, ethnic composition, or familial status, again, having children under the age of 18, or based on assumptions about the school system, specific maybe to the racial composition of the schools. The schools tend to be highly segregated in a lot of communities across Michigan, and this can be a way of kind of coded discrimination where it's individuals relying on the real estate professionals to make those choices about which school system works best. And that's something, of course, we caution real estate agents against. Having a proposed development or housing being advertised or targeted to groups that are protected. This is an example here of a development that didn't go forward for many reasons, but an out-of-state developer included some language in postcard mailers that actually got mailed to us at the Fair Housing Center. They were talking directly about who the targeted person was, and it included an illegal age restriction, which is protected here in Michigan, and then a reference that most of these people would be families without children. And of course, families with children are a protected class. So some opportunity for education there. We educated the folks that contacted us and contacted the developer as well. Other things to consider: restrictive occupancy standards, limiting the number of people who can live together safely, or having lower standards than what local health and safety code would allow. Sometimes we see definitions of who a family can be comprised of not be in compliance with federal law. That can show up in condo policies and zoning documents. So there's all kinds of opportunities to evaluate that and make some changes to make sure that there's good compliance with fair housing, but also this allows for more opportunity in housing. Some of the gaps that I wanted to touch on or share, having all those local fair housing protections, which are naturally limited to the boundary of the municipality that enacts that ordinance, leaves gaps in coverage. I mean, you can cross the street and literally lose a protection based on having crossed that municipal boundary. Until we had the recent expansion of sexual orientation and gender identity decision coming out of HUD based on a Supreme Court decision, that was a population that really was relying on bubbles of protection through local ordinances. It's still not officially a national protected class, but there's at least the enforcement mechanism that we can rely on to help open up choice for the LGBTQ+ community. Something that people feel is very unfair right now, and it's certainly understandable, is how much rent is being charged or rent increases when leases are up for negotiation. Fair housing laws cannot address that. We are not able to tackle something like that unless the rent is being raised only for families with children or only for people of color, for example. But we don't have rent control here in Michigan. And so that requires helping people understand that and doing some of that education. And of course, fair housing laws don't necessarily address equally poor treatment. You know, we're looking at discrimination because of a protected class. So if there's providers out there who are not doing a great job across the board, we can't show that discrimination is happening. Other laws may come into play and hopefully will, but those are some of the gaps that I wanted to talk about. And then briefly circling back to source of income protections, which can happen in a number of local communities at the city ordinance level, but we don't have national statewide, and I'm not really aware of much in terms of Northwest Lower Peninsula Michigan in terms of communities that have this protection. So really encouraging that legal and verifiable income be counted towards household income, including the value assigned with the different vouchers, housing choice vouchers, Section 8 vouchers, veterans programs vouchers. Those local ordinances can help at least encourage that those be accepted as income. A lot of folks unfortunately get priced out automatically by the amount or qualifications required. Something else that we've seen, I briefly want to highlight too, is that we've had housing providers tell us that their insurance companies don't want to work with them if they accept Section 8 and housing choice vouchers. So that's something that we can assist with and would like to know about to help push back on. There is a great community-wide conversation, a statewide conversation happening about how do we potentially expand source of income protections across the entire state, either through tenant landlord law or adding it as a protected class under the state Civil Rights Act, the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act. So there's a group being pulled together and having regular conversations under MICA. It's the Coalition for Expanding Housing Access Group. So if that's something you're interested in, I'm happy to provide contact information to connect there as an opportunity. So I think something else about source of income and working with housing providers that had accepted subsidized income vouchers, had kind of included that group in their portfolio of tenants, tended to do better throughout the pandemic, because that was a source of income that wasn't necessarily automatically impacted by restaurants being closed, limits to public gatherings, entertainments, all sorts of businesses being negatively impacted, workers' hours being cut, or jobs being lost. So something to think about there in terms of the conversation today too. And housing providers working with programs, choosing to work with programs, we're happy to talk about how that can look under fair housing. You want to work with programs who don't discriminate unlawfully, but we're happy to have those conversations and help housing providers learn about that a bit more. We think it's important to evaluate zoning policies, and really we're willing to do whatever we can to increase awareness about fair housing and provide that education, technical assistance, best practices, resource guides from whichever perspective, in order to increase housing opportunity. And we may see these additional protections come into play. And of course, we'll push that information out if that happens. The list of protected classes may grow. We will see. So I want to invite you all to learn more about fair housing. We've got an event coming up in a couple of weeks, so you can find out information about it, get some targeted information on these topics. And I'm looking forward to questions and more dialogue before the end of our time, and I'll turn it over to Ryan. Or to Yarrow, she's back.
Thanks, Liz. There were a few questions that came in the chat. I think only one was really a clarifying question that I thought maybe you could answer right now, and then we'll dive into the other ones. What is the definition of an inclusive community? Do you have a definition for that, or do you want to pass till later?
No, I understand that. From the fair housing perspective, we want anyone who has the ability, if they qualify for the housing, we're not asking housing providers, real estate agents, other housing professionals to take less. If they qualify for the housing based on objective criteria and don't experience an illegal barrier under fair housing laws to access that housing, that is something that I would feel would be a strong component of an inclusive community. I think the other thing is having people feel welcome. Fair housing laws prohibit harassment, intimidation, coercion, some of that behavior, which unfortunately we do see, where not everyone feels welcome, whether it's within a neighborhood or the entire city or region. And I think that's an important component. That's a huge question, but those are kind of the two key pieces that I want to share in terms of, I think, what's helpful to this conversation.
Awesome, thank you. We will save the other questions for the end. And Ryan, let's queue you up for the next part.
Well, hello. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Yarrow. I will pull up my share screen. There, can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, for those of you tuning in to hear Ashley Halliday-Schmant, I'm sorry she couldn't be here today, but I'm filling in for her, and if you all clicked off, we would understand why. Thanks for having me. Today, we're talking about the Coalition to End Homelessness. We're going to talk about what the coalition is, who is the coalition, what we mean when we say the end of homelessness, how we end homelessness, and what's the need in our community. So the coalition is a collaboration of agencies all working together to ensure homelessness is rare, brief, and one time throughout Northwest Michigan. That means a person who falls into homelessness, we want it to be less times, right? Even if they do, for a very short time and never, ever again. Our values are collaboration. We work together We know that one agency, one approach, one person, one community, one program cannot end homelessness. We have to do it together, and we need more partners. We need more help. And certainly accountability, working together, making sure we're doing the best we can, and looking at our data to drive decisions. Are we reaching the right people? Is what we're doing working? Do we have enough housing to make this happen? Our coalition is made up. We have a backbone support role with the Northwest Michigan Coalition to End Homelessness, which Ashley is the director of. And she really kind of is the glue to keep us all together, keeps us in line with our vision, gets us together to talk about strategy, making sure we're measuring the right way and together collaboratively and standardly across the board, and then also building public will, meaning things like this, talking to the community, working with myself on education and advocacy and policy, and then certainly to leverage funding and maximize the dollars that we do get the best way we can to help end homelessness as quick as possible for people. She also, we have it's called the HMIS system administration, which is a pretty technical term. It's like electronic medical records for homelessness. That way, every agency working with people are all on the same page, and so there can be a seamless kind of move for services and connection to housing with folks. And then the Youth Action Board Chair, it's a person with lived experience who really does advocacy, education, and gathering more people to help talk about ending homelessness. So we're also comprised of a executive committee that is made up of executive directors of housing agencies, also Housing North, and from the Michigan Balance of State COC coordinator. So another kind of colleague that works with all of the rural counties in Michigan comes together to kind of help make sure we're going in the right direction. And then the steering committee, there's multiple chairs of work groups and people coming together to look at our values, making sure we're collaborating, accountability, and looking at that data to make sure we're using that to make our decisions. Then we have a number of work groups, and this is where some of you may be able to tap in if you're interested in helping with the work. We have a communications group, really looking at messaging about the true kind of experience of people experiencing homelessness and really what's being done about it. The Housing Resources, the Basic Needs Coalition. We really have organizations get together to make sure they're coordinating and meeting the basic needs of people experiencing homelessness in a more efficient way. Data and standards, really looking at the data and what we're doing out there and measuring, and then making sure we're doing standard approach. It shouldn't matter if a person who's homeless, if they show up at a homeless shelter, the police find them, or street outreach come along, or whatever it is, that they have the same approach and access to getting help as everyone else. We have the Outreach and Identification Committee, really making sure we're looking at our tactics and looking at our data, and are we really reaching the people that need us and need us the most? And then shelter and diversion. Are our shelters doing a housing focused approach? Are we able to help the people coming into shelter get out of shelter? And then diversion is really working with somebody, making sure that they are actually needing the help, maybe some problem solving and figuring out ways to not fall in homelessness but still get stable. And coordinated entry is really a kind of a fancy way of saying prioritizing the resources and making sure it's available for everyone who needs it, not just people who show up at the right place at the right time. So at the Northwest Michigan Coalition and Homelessness, which I'm a part of, we believe healthy, thriving communities have ended homelessness. Ending homelessness means that homelessness becomes rare, brief, and one time. I talked about that earlier. Doesn't mean that there will never be someone who's homeless, right? But what we really are driving towards is making sure it doesn't occur very often. People get out quickly and never again. So the way we measure it is certainly looking at tracking how many people are actually homeless at this time, or current time, or real time. Looking at how many are coming in and how many are coming out. And really, like at our data meetings, we're always talking about this and looking and finding ways to make it happen. So if we think about kind of the federal definition of the end of homelessness, is if a community or a coalition like ourselves can house every person within 30 days that they're identified as homeless, effectively we call that the end of homelessness. That's meaning people are found quickly and housed quickly. There will still be a need for people to stay, say, in homeless shelters, but if we've entered homelessness with this definition, our homeless shelters will not be overflowing with wait lists and people, lots of people unsheltered in our communities. Now, I added this slide about talking with people because it's a good opportunity to kind of break down some myths of homelessness. For those of you that don't know me, I did do street outreach, working with people experiencing homelessness on the streets for many years in our area. And this is kind of what I found when talking with people. And you may have volunteered at a homeless shelter or talk with people who are experiencing homelessness, and you may hear them say things like, I choose to be out here, or I want to be out here. And what they're really saying is they're preserving dignity. When you're a person experiencing homelessness and everywhere you go, that's your identity, really can wear on your spirit. So people are trying to survive and also preserve dignity. You may hear things like, I'm free out here. It's more free when you're homeless, when really what's going on is maybe shelter isn't working for them. Or I'm a survivor. And certainly people experiencing homelessness are surviving mostly. We do see a lot of people who actually pass away who are homeless. But what really is going on is they're still homeless and they don't see a way out of it. You may hear people say, I can drink and drug anytime. I like it this way. But what really is happening is they can't stop using. We know basic needs. If someone is homeless or falls into homelessness or continues to be homeless, even after they seek treatment, it's really hard to clean yourself up, if you will, if you don't have a place to live. You might hear people say, I'm tough. But we really know inside it's scary. So just a little human aspect of homelessness there for you guys. So how do we do this? How do communities end homelessness? By working together. We decide that we're going to do this and really look at, okay, what are we doing? What can we do better? And what can we do together to help end homelessness for people? Having a robust homeless response system. So we look at, do we have enough people identifying and working with people to get into housing? Do we have enough people advocating for housing? Do we have enough shelter beds? Do we have enough housing units to actually put people in? So by working together and all being on the same page, we can tackle this huge societal issue. The service delivery system, kind of the definition is there, a robust collaborative service delivery system must be in place in order for homelessness to become rare, brief, and one time. We think we have that in our community through years and years of effort and coordination from people like Ashley. The homeless response system, we have a call center, homeless hotline, if you will. Anyone who's homeless or in unstable housing, call the 844 number, and they do an assessment and look to see really what the need is. And they may refer to a street outreach program or a homeless shelter, but also street outreach covering the getting to know the communities and people who may run into people experiencing homelessness so they can alert them, and really bringing the resources to help people end their homelessness right to where they are. An emergency shelter, it's not meant to be, say, unpaid hostel, right? It's really focused on helping, supporting people to get the resources they need, the documents they need, the encouragement they need to get out of homelessness. And then the rental assistance and supportive services and housing. Not everyone needs rental assistance. Not everyone needs supportive services in housing, but as we work together as a system, we identify the people that do and support them where needed. One of our funded agencies is the Northwest Michigan Community Action Agency, and they actually run that call center for our 10-county region. They have the diversion program and a youth-specific diversion program. So they're really working with the people experiencing homelessness or who are calling and saying that they need some help, really providing a lot of support, resources, problem-solving things to make sure that they actually don't have anywhere to go, or can they identify somewhere they can stay and then get help to get on their feet without having to fall into homelessness or exiting shelter really quickly. They also run the rapid rehousing programs, which is a program that comes with a short-term subsidy and a short-term case management support person to help people identified as needing that intervention. And they upload and sign up all folks for the housing choice voucher, which is a state Section 8 housing subsidy. Another one of our funded organizations is Goodwill Northern Michigan. They run the Goodwill Inn temporary emergency shelter with a housing focus in mind, and also the street outreach program. And actually, we have 3 teams for street outreach. One that's youth and young adults, working with young people aged about 14 to up to 25. Then we have a family outreach team that works with families with children. Then we have our adult street outreach team that works with single adults and couples without children, which is by far the largest group of people experiencing homelessness that we see. We also have a housing support services program, which provides permanent supportive housing for people moving out of homelessness through state project-based vouchers. Another funded organization is the Northwest Michigan Supportive Housing Program. They run permanent supportive housing, our HUD supportive housing program. So this is people oftentimes experiencing chronic homelessness. Permanent supportive housing means a permanent subsidy, could be a full subsidy, and a worker to help them work with identified goals that they have to help improve their lives themselves, or work on things to help provide stability in housing. Now, the people that get into programs like this that we refer to are people that may have been homeless a long time. They may have a lot of high needs, but it's actually the smallest group of people experiencing homelessness. So we find we're able to help people through our systematic approach get to the right resources and then end their homelessness. The need, how many units do we need? How many people are experiencing homelessness? Well, in our 5-county region, the Greater Grand Traverse, right now, 300 people experiencing homelessness in our region. Most are in Traverse City. It's been a 16% increase in the past 6 months. We're kind of seeing the pandemic catch up to us here. In our 10-county region, over 400 people in the region experiencing homelessness. People are homeless because of long periods of time, or for long periods of time, because there's not enough affordable housing. We need 2,942 one-bedroom units for people making $2,000 or $26,000 a year or less. That's a lot of units. We also see a lot of building going on in our community, so we can advocate for the people with the lowest incomes to have access to some of those. The gaps, like we talked about, not enough rental housing, tight rental market, not enough private landlords, and then rental limits within our programs. So the subsidies that come to help people pay rent, there's a cap on what that rent could be, and sometimes that doesn't align with what's available out there. Thinking of the major gaps, people experiencing homelessness are affected by housing shortage at much higher rates than people who are housed. There's not enough landlords. We need landlords to work with the programs. Landlords in the private market can help end homelessness. There are even incentives. There's the Coalition End Homelessness has a fund that will offer new landlords who rent to any program in the coalition receive a $1,000 bonus, and there's also what we call a damage fund. Say you took a chance in a program in somebody and something happened to the unit, can help pay for some of the damage. So it helps kind of balance out some of the risk that folks might be fearful of. And then the major gap is rental limits of our programs. The average rent in Grand Traverse County is almost 30% higher than what our programs allow. So you can kind of, we all know housing's an issue, but you can kind of really drill down here to see how, when people are experiencing homelessness, how difficult it can be to get out of homelessness. So there's our logo, bumper sticker, website. I encourage you to go there, check it out, get involved, and I'll turn it back over to Yarrow.
Thanks, Ryan, and thank you to Liz. It looks like we do have a few questions that came in. Ryan, I just wanted to start off by asking, what is the number one thing you think people on this call could do to help end homelessness? I know that's kind of a loaded question, but if there's one thing you could encourage everybody today to do, what would it be?
I would show up in your community, your local area, and speak at planning meetings, commission meetings, whatever it is, and support the promotion of including housing for people with 30% or less area median income. It's really, I mean, it's tough for anybody trying to find housing, but if you're that disenfranchised, we have to also, as we advocate for housing, make sure we don't forget and insist that we build strong communities by helping people get off the street.
Thank you. I also just wanted to point out that one of the things I think too, if you go to a public meeting and make public comment, you could ask for elected officials to consider set-aside units specifically for the homeless population, but for anybody making 30% of the area median income or less. And we have some talking points on that, that we can share. Liz, there is a question in the chat for you, and I'm going to read it here because I didn't take notes fast enough. Do fair housing laws protect renters from economic discrimination, specifically when applying for subsidized rental housing? Is it permitted within fair housing laws to perform credit checks and deny a resident housing because of poor or non-existent credit score?
That's a great question. So there's not a specific protection for that. And generally what we would ask of a housing provider is to establish a standard and then apply it consistently, equally across the board, in order to ensure that they are treating each of the protected classes similarly. But we have to acknowledge that there's a population that we're talking a lot about today, and Ryan shared some really pertinent facts and kind of astonishing statistics to think about, who does that leave out when we rely on perfect credit score, or we're looking at favoring the highest income tenants. These are legal things to do, but it's also not required. So if somebody does want to do a background check or a credit check, rental history check, those are standard things in the housing transaction. And from the fair housing perspective, we would want to see equal treatment. But sometimes equal treatment does end up leaving people behind. And of course, there's a caveat that if it's a person with a disability, you may actually, in terms of practice, have to do a little bit more to provide equal treatment. Treating everyone the same doesn't always equate equal treatment. There was also another question about no felony case law that I want to address really quick, if that's okay. HUD has put out guidance for the public housing agencies like housing commissions. That guidance came out in 2015 and is still in use. And then for the private housing market, there was a second set of guidance that came out in 2016 that really helped establish the idea that felony bans are no longer defensible as discriminatory. And there's a couple other takeaways. We have fact sheets on a lot of topics, but specific to this one on our website. The new administration at HUD is looking at following up on criminal background screening. They're looking at issuing best practices, additional tools, and revisiting that conversation that was started in 2016. And in fact, they're holding listening sessions right now, from what I understand, with some stakeholders. So that guidance will hopefully be coming soon to further inform kind of what to do and not to do, but it's just a better understanding. You know, a third of US adults have a criminal background of some sort. So that's a significant barrier in terms of accessing housing, which of course then can impact employment. And so they acknowledge those significant ripple effects with those two sets of guidance, which I appreciate. And I'm really looking forward to more clarity and more examples to pass around.
Great, well, thank you. I just want to give a chance for anybody who is on the call right now. If you do want to ask a question live, you can go ahead and raise your hand or unmute and ask that question. So I'll just pause for a minute and see if there are any others that want to ask any questions. You guys all know how to solve fair housing issues and homelessness, right? After this.
It's a little bit overwhelming, I would imagine.
Yeah.
I feel what it might be is a bit of a stunned silence of like, okay, we have work to do. So I'll throw that out there.
Yeah, and I'll just see if, does anybody else have any other questions? I have a few that I'll ask that I queued up, but just want to give some space for anybody to ask Ryan or Liz who are working in this world. Oh, Bonnie, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to see if I can undo that too. Hi, finally I work in there. Just want to introduce myself. I'm the newly appointed coordinator for Nation Outside. We drive policy and practice reforms that build transformative relationships with our justice impacted community.
So Bonnie, it seems like you paused. Maybe you could turn your video off and you would have a little bit more bandwidth there.
I just have with BDA and the new Freedom Ministry. So I'm building relationships with them and hope to start building some relationships with some of you guys that we can maybe work on some of these. And
so Bonnie, it's hard to hear you right now. You're kind of going in and out. Maybe you could put some of the information. Oh, I think we might in the chat. But thank you for sharing.
And I pop my email in there too if you want to send me anything. Looking forward to learning more. John, you had your hand up, I think.
Oh, you're muted.
John Murphy, Mayor of Petoskey. I have a question for you. Is it possible, what is the address? I know I've got some people I would like to share this with. What is your address to see the actual PowerPoint presentation?
Good question, John. I should have mentioned this. This is recorded, and what we'll do is send a link to everyone who registered. And then we also put these on our YouTube channel. But we'll make sure that you get a copy of this that you can share with others. And we can also share the copies of the PowerPoint separately as well.
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay.
And I'm happy to talk to any groups that are interested to learn a little bit more, zoom into other meetings. I really believe that everybody has a stake in understanding fair housing. And if that's ever of interest, please let me know.
I at some point would like you to present to the City Council of Petoskey or the Planning Commission or both at some point.
Sure.
Why don't you can get my contacts, I'm sure.
Yes.
Okay. I'll have you contact me and we can talk about a scheduling. Is that okay?
Sure. And we're also hosting a fair housing land use and zoning conversation at our workshop on April 28th. A really strong group out of the West Coast that has done some phenomenal work with helping neighborhoods and neighbors understand the importance of fair housing and land use. Guidebooks for government officials, all of that. I'm really excited to get him to speak remotely to share, they've done some really statewide unique initiatives. So he's going to bring some of those best practices. So I'll pop that link into the chat for that conference. If you can't attend that day, that's okay. We'll have a recording of that workshop. We would just need you to register. And then Ryan Kilpatrick at Housing Next is going to be part of that conversation to help bring it to Michigan.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So any other questions? I see there's some stuff shared in the chat, some contact information. If you don't know this, because it took me a while to figure this out, you can right click on the dots on the chat and save them yourself, the information and the questions, but we will also send out all the contact information in a follow-up email. So Ryan, we are gonna have a follow-up workshop. This is part one of a series. And so we're going to kind of move into more details about what the different members of the coalition, what they actually do and how to get involved in those programs. But I guess I just wondered if you could speak a little bit, you know, to how somebody, or what is the biggest need right now in your world, aside from housing? And how could somebody, if they wanted to be a landlord right now to help with the homelessness issue, get in touch? Who would they get in touch with? To become somebody who would offer a space for somebody to live in?
I would say Ashley Halliday-Schment, the director of the coalition. We could probably throw her email in the chat here. I'm not sure exactly what it is offhand. Or going to the website, the Northwest Michigan Coalition End Homelessness, which is endhomelessness, nmi.org. There's ways to get involved there. There's landlords can get in touch there. I think there might even be something to click for landlords on there, or at least email Ashley. There's also ways for people to volunteer there, donate items. We host welcome home basket drives, things like that. And a link to the Basic Needs Coalition is on there. But certainly the need is always housing. We need to continue to advocate, promote, and really, I think a big part of it is understanding homelessness, and if we understood that people who are homeless don't choose homelessness, hopefully we'd be able to advocate more, just kind of not think that, oh, that's something they choose, that's the way it is. Humanize homelessness. If you see someone who's homeless, it's okay to say hello, look them in the eyes like you would anyone else you're passing down the street, that sort of thing.
Great. Well, I really appreciate both of you being here today. If you haven't already, sign up for the event on the 28th through the Fair Housing Center. I'll make sure that link goes out in the follow-up email. This is recorded and it's on our website, or will be on our website and sent out. And then just look for the second part where we'll kind of move through more of the resources and dive in a little deeper. And if anybody on the call, does have information about landlord groups or anything related to connecting with year-round rental opportunities, please do let us know and be in touch. And everything is on our website as well at Housing North. Liz, did you want to add anything?
I do, just to contribute to the year-round landlord conversation. If anybody's interested in learning more about that from the Fair Housing Best Practices perspective, we offer ongoing targeted how to comply with fair housing under rental classes. It's not something that's required, but we do recommend it, and we're happy to have you attend those classes, or just really urge you to connect with us with questions that you may have as you consider this. We're very, very happy to work with folks to help them understand fair housing from the housing provider perspective, kind of take away some of that mysteriousness or that, fair housing is out to get you type thinking. It's not. It's about providing that equal opportunity and working together. So we're very happy to help with tackling that side to encourage people to really consider coming into and providing much needed housing.
Really good point. Thank you, Liz. Ryan, any last words before we close?
I cannot stress enough. All the years I've worked in this, I did not meet one person who was experiencing homelessness that wanted to be homeless. So please, please, please tell all your friends. People want to get out, and maybe what's being offered isn't offered in the way that they need. So that's why the Coalition End Homelessness is so important.
And just a reminder that the coalition does cover the 10 counties in Northwest Michigan, which is the same footprint as Housing North. So thank you all again for attending. I am gonna say goodbye, stop recording, and then look for a follow-up email from us within a few days. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.